blue light filters, right? Because I'm in front of screens a lot more, right? And so I'm trying to keep my eyes in good shape when I'm in front of screens, right? And in front of screens. And so I'm working on this .NET program, and I am trying to get it to a point where I have it in a stable place, have it finished, and my goal is to get it to an acceptable level where I can have it in the Microsoft Store in the next couple of weeks, right? And so this is more of an exploratory project for me with this particular application and everything that I've done with it, right? So I'm just exploring a couple of things and seeing what are the possibilities, and I'm going about the software development on this in a very conventional way, right? So my goal is not to create an all-out commercial application with this particular project, this particular program, but simply to stretch the limits of my design between Linux and Microsoft Windows. So in this particular session, in this particular instance, I'm focusing on Microsoft Windows, and I want to see it get all the way to the end in terms of a finished software application that I'm moving away from SQL Server, and just like with the Linux version, I'm going to have this run on SQLite. So I did some rudimentary research in the last 2 days, and so I want to get this to a very stable place with SQLite, and I want it to be self-contained in much the same way as the Linux version. And then I'm going to complete this process here, right? And I, again, wanted to satisfy my curiosity on this, so I just want to have this as my update project when I keep track with Microsoft.NET. So that's what you're going to see here. You're going to see me do some troubleshooting with Visual Studio 2022 because I factory reset the computer, right? Because I wanted to reinstall Visual Studio. I wanted to get rid of SQL Server altogether and not have any residual registry entries from the removal of SQL Server. And so I wanted a clean build of Microsoft Windows, so I factory reset Microsoft Windows on this nice Pentium, Intel Pentium based instance with 4 gigabytes of RAM and a 500 gigabyte SSD. And so again, this is just simply to see what's going on in the Microsoft world and stay current on that. And so what follows here is just simply leveraging my experience to move forward this design, move forward this architecture, and get things to a good place. So I hope you learned something from this particular movement that I've done here. And then the videos that I do in the next couple of weeks and in the next couple of months, they're going to be much more heavily Linux based, right? There's going to be a heavier emphasis on Linux because I see a lot more happening in that space, a lot more happening with open source that would take quite a bit of time for me to explain here. So I'm going to do another video after this that goes into that a little bit. But as far as the Microsoft.NET and the Microsoft technology that I'm using here, hopefully the explanations that I provide are of some use. So I am in Windows 11, and I've started the install for Visual Studio Community 2022. I had factory reset Windows 11, so this is a fresh install of Windows with a fresh install of Visual Studio. And so the choice before me is whether to do individual components or what is called workloads. I would prefer to skip workloads if I can, because I really would like to have my development environment at a minimalist level, right? So I really don't want more than I actually need for the type of development I'm trying to do in this case, which is desktop development using WPF and SQLite, right? So I'm trying to keep things to a minimal level. So I'm going through the individual components that I think I need, that I know I need, right? And I'm also keeping an eye on the amount of gigabytes needed to download these components. In the lower right-hand corner of this setup screen, it shows you how much data is needed to download these components over the internet. And, you know, I can use public Wi-Fi to download these, but think about those that are in, you know, other parts of the world, or they're just in a situation with like maybe a mobile hotspot or a more limited data plan, trying to get up and running on this Visual Studio situation, and they'll run into more constraints if they do the all-out, full-out install of Visual Studio. So I don't have that problem right now, but I have had that problem in the past, right? So I can definitely relate to that. And so, but even without the data plan issues, right? Capacity issues and accessibility to broadband, there's still the issue of, you know, keeping your system clean and keeping it as minimalist as possible, right? Oh, I tried to click that out of the support button, and I was just curious what it would do, and it doesn't really do anything from what I can see. So I think there may be an issue there. But so I got the individual components that I want selected, right? And now I am just going through the motions of Visual Studio download. I selected the option to download everything first and then install it, right? So download everything first and then install it. And I prefer to do it that way. That way, if there's any hiccups, I'm not stuck with a somewhat botched installation. Although I don't think that would happen in 2023 with all the refinements they've done to the installer. So I've also been reorganizing the start menu here. The update to Windows 11 that's out right now. I like what they've done where we can put start menu icons at the bottom of the start menu for settings, documents, and so on. You can't see it clearly here, but at the very bottom, right next to my name, there they are. So I'm launching Visual Studio, and it wants me to sign in, and I had some sign-in issues, right? So I skipped past that, and I'm just running it without being signed in, which is just fine in this case. I don't have very much to synchronize. So I see the limitations of not using workloads is you don't get projects. You don't have projects that you can select, you know, like console project, Windows Form project, WPF project, class library project. All of those appear to be missing when you don't have workloads. Now, I could probably deep dive and figure out how I can get projects without having workloads. But to me, in terms of the time frame that I have on what I want to accomplish with getting this software program set up with SQLite, that's not a high priority for me. So in order to just get to the next step, I decided to go ahead and enroll in workloads, and I'm going to choose the desktop workload. And it does add quite a few components that I feel I don't need for this situation, but let's just roll with it, and this will help get everything moving the way we need it to get moving. So I'm pleased with this overall, despite the concerns I've raised, despite some of the things I see that need improvement in the Visual Studio situation. I'm overall pleased with this process, right? So make no mistake about that. I actually like Visual Studio, and I like the way these tools are working. You know, I would love to, you know, take them to the sci-fi level of immaculate quality and capability, but you know, you use what you got, and Visual Studio is not the worst in the world. So I went to the SQLite website. I was looking at a build conference video from someone yesterday or the day before yesterday, where they were talking about, SQLite in reference to Entity Framework Core, SQLnet, and ADO.net, and Dapper, and how, as you go through those different options for code libraries, right, you have some pros and cons. I'm going to go with ADO.net, right, because that's going to give me the most flexibility in this particular case. And so I'm looking through the libraries, as mentioned in that build conference, right, because we're using NuGet, right? And so I'm looking through the NuGet packages, and when I was looking at that build conference video, Microsoft build conference video, I noticed that there were some NuGet packages for SQLite that were more advised than others. And so I'm looking for the official one, and I'm not looking for it through the website. I'm just using the website to kind of get a glimpse from SQLite's point of view, what they have listed. But we're going to get the SQLite libraries through Visual Studio. But I also wanted to download the tools for SQLite so I can work with SQLite directly, work with the databases directly, right? And so once you have these tools downloaded, all you have to do is put the directory containing these tools in an appropriate spot, wherever you want to put it. It doesn't really matter, but putting it, on the C drive or putting it somewhere in a very central location, it's going to make things a little easier in terms of maintaining the tools. And then the next thing that you do is you go into the system properties for Windows, right? And you're going to set the environment variable, the environment path, right, to the SQLite tools folder. That way, when you're in the command line, your command prompt, the Windows command prompt, Windows terminal, or PowerShell, any of those, you will have access to SQLite when you invoke it directly. And so I'm going to use the settings, see down there at the bottom, with Windows 11 updates here recently, you can put all of that down at the bottom. And so I thought that was pretty cool. Anyway, so I went and I customized Windows 11, after I did the factory reset. So here I'm just in the environment properties, and I'm just going to click New and add the path to SQLite, or to the SQLite 3 tools, and this will allow me to easily invoke SQLite 3 and the related tools from the command line. So I'm going to test it out first and see how that goes, right? And there it is. There's SQLite, and then I just exit. So with all that in place, right, I'm actually ready to move forward to the next step, right, which is I actually want to bring down my WPF project from GitHub, right? So I already have a snapshot of the project in GitHub, and what I want to do here, and this is more of curiosity. Actually, everything I'm showing you is really curiosity, because there are more direct ways to do a lot of this stuff, right? But I want to also just do a checkup on the Visual Studio tools. So I want to see it from a different perspective, and here I want to see how streamlined this process is. And so far, and there's actually over 30 minutes here that I cut out of troubleshooting the authorization and authentication. There were some issues there. I had actually forgotten my GitHub password, so I had to work that out. But so now I'm cloning down my GitHub repository for this project through Visual Studio. I'm not using the command line. I'm not doing anything like that. Visual Studio now has authorization to my GitHub account, and I'm letting Visual Studio just drive this process because I want to see how Visual Studio handles it. I've done this before through Visual Studio, and all the times I've done it in the past, it has been it's been a relatively smooth process. Sometimes it's been an absolutely smooth process, but I just want to see what that looks like here. So keep in mind, I'm on a machine that's running an Intel Pentium processor with 4 gigabytes of RAM, so things are a little slower than you might see on a different machine. This process does recognize that as it's bringing down the project, or it's already brought down the project, that one of the projects in the overall solution needs to be updated to a newer version of the frameworks that I'm using. And so I think I had it set for 4.8. I think it needs to be updated to 4.8.1. I told it to go ahead and update that for me. So I'm going to see how well it does that part of the process. So the repository has come down. So we got that part going. But just from my experience using Visual Studio for just over 20 years, I can already tell that there's some issues here. I can just eyeball it and see it. And the way that the icons are presented in the Visual Studio IDE, Integrated Development Environment, right? I'm kind of spoiling it, right? But yeah, this isn't correct. So, and the other telltale sign is you don't have a build menu item at the top. So, you know, if you are working with code, C#, C++, Visual Basic, JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, whatever, you're going to have a build menu item at the top. That's missing here. So I'm like, okay, all right, I done played along, so I went ahead and closed all that out. So now I'm going to just go. I know that all the files have been downloaded. So let's go ahead and open the solution directly, right? Not through a folder link, right? And I'm sure that folder link works very well, but it's also not very intuitive, right? Going between that view and the more conventional view using the solution file. So loading the solution file, and we once again get the prompt for the Visual Studio Framework conversion, the Visual Studio Framework version and conversion, and that prompt is actually, you would think that it would automatically download the .NET Migration Assistant, right? But it doesn't do any of that, right? It doesn't do any of the conversions. You can go in and you can update the NuGet packages, you know, by clicking a checkbox in the pop-up dialog. But ultimately, this issue in this case is best resolved by going into the properties for the project. So the project properties, going through the visual dialogues in Visual Studio, going through that. You can use the .NET Migration Assistant tool, and that would work just as well. But in this case, the project properties, it's going to be just a bit quicker than going that route. So that's ultimately how I resolve this problem. But before I can get to that point, I'm waiting for the project to build. So I know the build is going to fail, but I like to let the build run anyway, because I want to see all of the diagnostic messages, right? So it's not just about getting the framework version to compliance, but just being aware of all the issues I can as I'm going through that, because that may not be the only issue that that we're contending with here. So again, Intel Pentium, which this is a great Pentium that we got, but it's going to take a while. And I see that the main error message is the framework version in the configuration file for the project, right? And so we're going to update that configuration file through the properties dialog, right? We can hand edit the configuration file as well. That could work, but you know, in my experience, you get a much more comprehensive update when you go through properties dialogues. And before I actually do any of that, I actually wanted to go into Visual Studio, go through the options for the individual components, and see if I was missing Framework 4.8, because I was quite sure that I actually installed it. But before I could do that, I had an update to Visual Studio. So it was like, okay, I know I just installed Visual Studio the day before, and I already have an update, which I don't mind, but you know, it takes a while. I do have to put in I'll put that comment in later. I'll say it later. But first, let's look at these components. So I see I got 4.8 and 4.8.1. I got all the right things. But so if I have all the right frameworks installed and I got the targeting pack, right, then the only logical conclusion is that the automatic conversion in Visual Studio isn't working. So you know, I'm kind of plugged in on that intuitively, and I'm saying, okay, let's just go forward to a solution that I have seen work more often than not, which is to go into the property dialog, which we are here, and change the framework version. And so here we are, right, and that's all changed, and I'm going to build it, and I expect the build to succeed, less any other issues, right? But yeah, the build in this case does succeed, so everything looks good. And I need to go in and update those NuGet packages, right? So that while I'm looking at that, the comment I was going to refer to earlier, right, is that, and I am seriously thinking about doing a video on this, and I should have did it this time, right? But it's too late now, because to do it now would take me about 10 hours, right? So I'll have to wait until the next opportunity. Maybe I'll wait until sometime in the fall. But what if we had a side-by-side comparison of updating Visual Studio and Windows, right, versus doing the same process of updates in Linux? The time involved would be a fraction of the time. So this screen that you're seeing right here, it's me going into the Git command line because, and I cut all of this out of the video just to save time, but pushing the updates to GitHub this time around, it was a huge mess. So I wanted to get my updates into the repository without delay, and so that's what I did. So we'll cover the rest of this in the next video, but thank you for tuning in and checking out this process with me. Right, and so this last part, what it just says is that knowing the process from multiple dimensions and multiple angles from the command line to the visual is vitally important.